Hello, I'm Dr. Shannon Farrell, and I'm the leader of the project entitled Mental Health Issues for Farmers, Their Families, and Their Communities. And while that may be a long title, our goal is simple. We just want to provide you with the resources that you need to improve your mental well-being. This project wouldn't have been possible without funding provided by USDA NEFA through the Southern Risk Management Education Center, and we're very grateful for their support. The overwhelming majority of U.S. farms are family farms, and anyone who's been involved in family farming for any length of time knows that family farming can be stressful. Furthermore, the stress may come from the family more than from the farming. Today's presentation, provided by Dr. Nathan Hardy, helps you understand how to deal with your family in stressful times and how to build up relationships in those environments rather than break them back down. He'll also provide several tools to help you de-escalate tense situations. Along with this presentation is a very quick survey to complete after you've watched, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback on that survey. Additionally, you'll find a link to the project website with many more resources that you might find useful. We appreciate your time in watching and joining us today.
Hello, my name is Nathan Hardy. I am an OSU professor of marriage and family therapy. I specialize in treating couples who have relationship distress. And so that's kind of what I do here at the university, and it's somewhat, I'll be weaving in some of that information in this presentation today. But I'm grateful to have this opportunity to share my thoughts about the importance of communication during difficult times and times of stress. We're all familiar with stress. Stress is a part of all of our lives, and there are many, many difficult things that we all go through. As you can see from these photos, we're living in difficult times, and many of us are facing difficult circumstances and challenges. There are many factors that affect us directly or indirectly, and many of us are facing big crises, and some of us are simply just dealing with the day-to-day hassles of life. There's a global pandemic. There's civil unrest about racial inequality. Political polarization. We all experience stress at work and sometimes conflict with our loved ones. All of these and many more can affect our mental health and our relationships with others. And it's those very relationships that sometimes can be a source of stress in and of themselves, but they can also be a source of strength, a reservoir of comfort as we deal with stressful things. As we go along in this presentation, it's important to first get some basics down about stress. So here are a few basics, and we're all familiar with the experience of stress, but it's that feeling of emotional or physical tension. And it's a reaction to changes that are happening or various demands that we have on us. It can be caused even by our own thoughts. We can have thoughts about something in the future, and that brings on stress, or specific situations or events. Stress can be a positive aspect of our lives. It can get us ready to take action, to take on a challenge that we need to take on, but it can also be a negative aspect of our lives. Stress involves a hormonal release. It's a bodily release to physically prepare us to take the action that we need to, but sometimes that happens at inappropriate times and we don't need that. Stress can also involve mental rumination about whatever is making us anxious. Stress can be acute. It can be short-lived and can be strong and short-lived, but it can also be chronic. There can be an underlying level of stress that we live with that we don't really ever get rid of. And it's sometimes that chronic stress that really can get us into trouble, that can really affect our physical health and affect us in the negative ways we relate with others.
I'm on no sleep. No sleep. You don't know what it's like in there. All night long, things are creaking and cracking, and that red light is burning my brain.
You look a little stressed.
Oh, I'm stressed.
So we can see from that clip in Seinfeld how stress can even affect the way we look, the way we act around other people. While stress is certainly an individual experience, we tend to cope with stress in relationships. Guy Bodenman, his research on how couples cope with stress, and his educational program called Couples Coping Enhancement Training is where I will be drawing most of my information as I talk about how we deal with stress as couples, as partners, and how we do that together. So let's talk about stress in relationship. And this is some of what we know from the research, is that stress can negatively affect relationships. Couples spend less time together. Their communication's more superficial and negative. There's more arguments. They have poorer health. They have less sexual activity and less sexual satisfaction, poorer parenting, and more parental conflicts. So we've seen couples who are stressed experience all these negative qualities. And we know that stress spills over into our relationships from outside forces. And when it does, the stress of one person becomes the stress of the other, and that's the way in which it often spills over. So stress can deteriorate our communication. The way couples deal with stress together is what matters most. That's what predicts their relationship quality and stability. But because it can deteriorate that process, it's really important for couples to get intentional about the way that they communicate with each other about stressful things and just with each other in general. And finally, not all situations trigger the same kinds of stress. For couples, one partner may be stressed about a situation and the other one not at all. And also, even if both partners are experiencing stress, not all of them express it the same way. Some partners express it by withdrawal and some by getting angry. There are many, many ways in which couples are mismatched in how they're experiencing or dealing with stress. There are actually 3 different types of stress that we like to talk about. One is our critical life events. And these are things like severe illness, accident, the death of a loved one, unemployment, natural disasters. And natural disasters can affect our very work. Traumatic events, the sudden loss of resources or financial disaster, etc. Those aren't as common or frequent as other stressors, but they can be devastating and can really affect the way things happen in relationships. Developmental changes. All of us are going through developmental changes during the course of our lives. As we grow older, we have to take on new demands and new situations, and that can be stressful. Family changes, such as even getting married or having children, aging, career changes, retirement, etc. All of these can introduce new stressors into our lives. And finally, everyday hassles. These are the ones that we all deal with on a day-to-day basis. They're frequent and usually have a low level of severity. But because of that, other people often misunderstand our reaction to these everyday hassles and have little empathy for it, or they're not aware of the need to offer support. Some of us simply have different capacities for handling everyday hassles, and some hassles are simply greater than most people's capacities. And so it's really important to understand the role of these everyday hassles in our lives. And these, incidentally, are generally the most, have the most impact on relationships and matter the most. So when talking about these kind of everyday hassles, these daily stressors, there's actually 2 types that we like to talk about. One is traditional stress. And this is like time pressure, the pressure of a deadline, heavy workload, multiple tasks that are going on at the same time, high demands from others. All of us deal with traditional stress. And then there's personally relevant stress. These are situations where we feel embarrassed, misunderstood, not respected, validated, or not appreciated. And all of us deal with these as well. But depending on the situation or the context, either we're going to experience this as just a classical, traditional type of stress, or we're going to experience it as something personally difficult for us, not just because it's stressful, but because of the meaning of it and what meaning that holds for us personally. And that's important to understand as we talk about couples, because oftentimes it's that personally relevant stress that becomes very difficult to really deal with. Going back to the traditional stress, there's actually 2 ways that people really express this. Either through this kind of outward expression of anger, irritability, impatience, high proneness for arguments, whereas there's this more inward type of expression, which is withdrawal, having no interest in social activities, or just having this internal wish for rest or peace or to get away from it all. When it comes to personally relevant stress, it's important to recognize, is that what's going on for me or for my partner? And there's various signs that can tell us whether that's happening. One are strong emotions. Are we having strong arousal, emotional arousal to the situation or the thought that's coming into our minds? We can have a broad range of emotions. And that's a sign if we have multiple emotions like anger and sadness and shame and fear. Or long-lasting emotions. Do they occur over days, weeks, or even months? And finally, we could have a bitter aftertaste when we think about the situation. Those are classic signs that the stress is not just traditional, it's more personally relevant. It's also important to understand how stress emerges, how it begins to arise. Number one, we have baseline conditions. We all have our mood at the time that we deal with a stressful situation or thought. The situation itself may be a factor in how we deal with our stress. And our very personality obviously impacts the way we experience things, the way we react to things. And then we have what's called a primary appraisal. This is our first kind of way of thinking about the stress. It's the significance and the meaning that we attach to the stressful situation. And that can be a neutral significant or meaning. It can be positive, or it could be negative or stressful to us. And then we have what's called the secondary appraisal. And this is where we think about what are the demands that are being placed upon me, and do I have the capacity, do I have the resources to meet those demands? And those demands and resources can come from within ourselves or from others. And going back to this idea of how stress really impacts the relationship. Again, we have this spillover of stress. We have a stressful situation in our workplace environment or in life in general, and then that spills over into the relationship. And the way that works is where one person's stress is crossing over to the other person, either by them bringing the stress home in an expressive way, or kind of hunkering down inside themselves. Either way, it affects the other person. So stress is always a relational thing. And it acts like a stress contagion, creating this tension and these arguments inside the relationship. So what I'm going to do now is show you 4 steps to dealing with stress together, because this isn't just a solo activity coping with stress. This is a relational factor. And so the first one is becoming aware, realizing your own and your partner's stress, becoming aware that that's what's going on. Then opening up, talking about your own stress. Listening with interest to your partner's stress expression, and finally providing support, adequate support, matching your partner's needs. And I'm going to go through each one of these. First, becoming aware. So you need to look for the cues of stress, both inside yourself as well as in your partner. There are verbal cues, statements about stress is an obvious one. People describing their negative feelings, having devaluation of their own self, engaging in reproaches or blaming or criticism, etc. Any of those can be signs that the other person is stressful or that you're stressed. And paraverbal cues, these are the cues of the tone of voice. This can be an irritated tone of voice, impatient, raised, trembling, loud or quiet, slow or rapid. There's also nonverbal cues to be aware of, like body posture, withdrawal, neediness or clinginess, trembling, sweating, groaning, whining, sighing, cold hands, heart palpitations, or avoidance of eye contact. All of these can be signs that one is stressed. It's important to ask your partner, what is wrong? What happened? You look different. Is something bothering you? Or you can ask yourself similar questions. What is happening to me right now? What am I feeling? How am I acting? What is triggering me? Those are all great questions to ask, to become aware. And then second, opening up. Talk about the meaning of the stress, not just the stressor itself. Oftentimes when we talk about something that's stressful, we share the story, right? It's story time. And it is important to talk about the story, but how it's impacting us and why it might be impacting us is more important, which I'll describe briefly. Describe shortly the situation that stresses you, and then talk about your thoughts and feelings in the situation. Talk about even deeper emotions, and focused on the strongest feeling that you're experiencing. And is this related to a personal theme? Is this personally relevant stress? Why did the situation bother me so much? is a question you can ask or share with your partner. What has it to do with me personally? Sharing those things is really important and can really help trigger empathy and understanding in the other partner. There are actually 3 ways that people usually open up. First is neutral, superficially talking about the stressor. They're not giving much information at all. Implicit is where they're giving a hint about it, but not a lot of detail. And explicit is where they give much more detail about how and why it was stressful. This is usually easier to understand for the other person, therefore it becomes the most important way of communicating. Because again, if you're going to open up about your stress, then you're trying to create an environment where your partner can be understanding towards your experience. And then listening with interest. So this is for the other partner who's being shared a stressful circumstance, and they need to listen with interest. So give time and space. Don't push or rush the other person. Just listen, and don't offer premature support. And I know this is true for a lot of men, but it can also be true for women, that we like to give solutions. We like to fix it. We have a very strong fix-it mentality. And it's important for us not to offer premature fix-it solutions. And that's true for men as well as women. We all want to be heard first and understood before we're given solutions. No intrusive questions. Sometimes we pick at the other person because we don't like that they're stressed, and we ask questions that will try to challenge them in some way. So just ask open-ended questions. What, how, and why. Reinforce partner sharing by nodding, offering acknowledgement, etc. And listening, ultimately, it helps us understand, empathize, and then offer meaningful support. When we talk about providing meaningful support, there's actually 2 types. The first is emotion-focused support. And the second is problem-focused support, and I'll describe each of these separately. Emotion-focused support is where we're showing that understanding and empathy. We're offering maybe some encouragement. We can signal the solidarity of the relationship. And what that means is we show that the relationship is a place that this person can come to find support and to cope together. We signal mutual cohesion. You're not alone in this. We're together. We can take this on as a team. And you help to reframe the situation. You can offer a perspective that might be useful. And maybe you can help the other person calm down, not by saying you need to calm down, but by saying, I'm here with you, let's take a minute to think about this. And then problem-focused support. This is practical help with problem solving. And this kind of support is important when it's wanted. We're providing practical advice. We can help our partner get further information about the situation. We can help them find practical solutions. We can also encourage them to find their own practical solutions in ways that will be helpful to them. So what's the difference between these 2? When would you use one over the other? Well, first and foremost, emotional support is more important than practical support, in spite of popular belief. And amongst emotional support, empathy and understanding matter the most. Those 2 are the key. And when it is personally relevant stress, always offer emotional support first. Finally, the better matching between the kind of support that we offer and the needs of our partner, we get the bigger benefit. So really figuring out what is it that our partner needs, listening to them, not what we think they need or what we want them to need, but what they actually do need. Now, as a review of these steps, first, become aware. Second, open up. Third, listen with interest. And finally, provide support. There are various benefits of doing this. 1, the reduction of stress involved in this process decreases the burden that it has on the relationship and other areas of our life. We get support from our partner and the relationship. It involves an increase of trust in the partner. We feel the relationship is supportive to us and helpful to us. And finally, we can feel valued, understood, and supported. So, what happens when your relationship is stressful? When the relationship in and of itself is the source of stress? That's another animal and beast that we have to tackle. Well, John Gottman is a famous psychologist who provides a lot of scientific evidence for the factors that delineate between the masters of relationship stress and the disasters, is what he calls them, of relationship stress. And the masters are the ones who are the most successful. And we have some good evidence of what the aspects of that relationship looks like. So let me share a few of those. He actually shares several goals for couples on how to get things better on track. The first one is reducing negativity in conflict. The truth of the matter is conflict is inevitable. We cannot avoid it. There will always be conflict in our relationships and outside of our relationships. But the degree to which we can reduce the negativity in that conflict matters a great deal. Second is increase the positivity in our conflict. What we often don't realize is that we can bring a sense of positivity to our conflict, and that often makes the difference. The third is to just build positivity into the relationship in general. Conflict can't define everything in our relationship. We have to have other things that build positivity. And finally, having a sense of shared meaning in the relationship. Gottman captures these into what he calls a sound relationship house. So you can kind of think of this as a blueprint for relationship success and dealing with stressful relationships. So going through each of these real quickly, reducing negativity and conflict. So when we have fights, it's important to process the fight with our partner. Oftentimes couples have a fight and they just put it away. But sometimes it can be really helpful to process those fights so they don't keep becoming a nuisance to us. We need to do that with greater acceptance, understanding, and empathy, apologizing, taking responsibility for our part in the problem, things of that nature. Also, we need to reduce what Gottman calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. This is criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Gottman says these 4 will ultimately lead to divorce if they're not reduced in some way. We need to begin conflict with gentleness and curiosity, introducing our side of a problem in a gentle way and being curious about our partner's perspective and experience. And when problem solving, when actually needing to problem solve, it's really important to identify what are the core needs that are non-negotiable for you. What are the things you can't compromise? And what are the areas in which you can be flexible? Oftentimes couples aren't aware of those things and they don't dig deeply enough into them. And locating the hidden meanings behind each person's position. Oftentimes we don't realize that there are hidden issues involved in our conflict. And unpacking some of those can be the ticket to resolving some of our hardest conflicts. Finally, practicing psychological and physiological self-soothing. Like we've talked about with stress, it can affect our body. And so it is in couple relationships. Once you start getting escalated physiologically, oftentimes any type of conflict that you try to resolve is not going to work. And so taking a break and taking time to calm yourself and bringing the best in yourself forward is the ticket to being able to resolve conflicts effectively. Second, increase positivity in conflict. What Gottman found is that for every 1 negative exchange in a conflict, couples who are masters had 5 positive exchanges. That is the difference. So what we need to do when we have conflict is use what we call repair attempts. These are attempts to bring positivity back into the relationship or into the conflict. So we express affection and appreciation. You know, if my partner says something to me about some situation, I may immediately get defensive about it, but in time, as we work through it, I might see her point and understand and appreciate even that she's willing to bring that up to me. Apologizing goes a long way. Trying to find agreements, working to find where we can agree, finding compromises, using humor appropriately, making commitments of what you'll do to improve things, asking for direction, what would you like me to do, taking influence from your partner, being willing to be affected by them, using a soft voice, making I or we statements, taking responsibility, and showing understanding. We also need to accept that some differences on some of the differences we have on core issues are inevitable. We can't resolve them fully because we're just different people. In fact, 69% of conflicts that couples have are perpetual issues that never seem to go away. Shifting from being gridlocked around those issues to dialoguing about them and to accepting one another is the key. Third, build positivity in the relationship. We need to create an emotional connection during everyday moments. Search for those, look for those, try to create those. Build a culture of expressing appreciation and respect. Have regular stress-reducing conversations. We talked about talking about stress, but what we didn't talk about is the importance of, on a daily basis, finding a time to sit down at the end of the day and talk to each other about how your day was and what's been going on and what's affecting you. Being able to have those conversations well goes a long way. Building affection, good sex, romance, and passion. Finding shared activities that both of you can enjoy. Turning towards each other's bids for connection. We all make a bid for connection. Mine, I like physical touch. So I'll often try to give my wife a hug or try to touch her on her shoulder or put my arm around her. Sometimes she likes those bids for connections. Other times she's not ready to receive them. And so I've learned that we have to understand one another. And sometimes when those bids are not met, we need to process through the meaning of that and why that might happen. And sometimes not meeting those bids is okay. Other times it's important to make the effort to make that happen. And then savoring the positive moments, really sitting in them and enjoying them and recognizing and being grateful for the positive things that do happen. Finally, fourth is create a sense of shared meaning. It's important for couples to intentionally build rituals of connection. Things that couples know that they like to do, make that intentional so when something stressful happens, it doesn't destroy that activity that builds that sense of cohesion. Oftentimes couples don't realize until it's gone, until the very thing that they used to enjoy was taken away from them, and then they start to make it an intentional part of their lives. Support each other's life roles. We all have different roles, we all have different tasks that we're involved in. Offer meaningful support. Be there for one another. Don't leave each other on their own. Support each other's life dreams. We often have dreams, things that we want to accomplish in life. Do we support each other in helping one another meet those goals? And finally, explicitly talk about shared goals, things that you share together, your own shared mission as a couple, the values that you hold, etc. Sometimes conflict can't just be resolved or isn't just relevant to relationships. But sometimes conflict also is happening in our everyday world. Although I'm not going to talk about dealing with stress with others in detail, I will point you to a book called Crucial Conversations. I found this book to be extremely helpful in describing how to have effective conversations with people in our day-to-day lives. And their basic process is working on you first, getting ready to have those conversations, focusing on what's shared between you and the other person, the mutual goal that you have, and moving to action, actually finding ways in which you'll move forward to resolve whatever the issue was. Finally, sometimes communication in your relationship simply isn't enough in dealing with stress. You may need to find inner peace for yourself. So this video clip is a quick little video clip showing you the importance of inner peace.
Inner peace. Inner peace. Oh, inner peace.
Master Shifu! Master Shifu, what do we got? Pirates? Vandals of Volcano Mountain? Whatever it is, I will take them down. Because I am in a mood. I need to get something done, you know what I mean? What are you doing?
One of Master Oogway's final teachings.
Whoa! Awesome! How did you do that?
Inner peace.
Inner peace. That's cool. Inner peace of what?
It is the next phase of your training. Every master must find his path to inner peace. Some choose to meditate for 50 years in a cave just like this, without the slightest taste of food or water.
Or
Some find it through pain and suffering, as I did. Oh, the day you were chosen as Dragon Warrior was the worst day of my life. By far, nothing else came close. It was the worst, most painful, mind-destroying, horrible moment
okay.
I have ever experienced. But once I realized the problem was not you, but within me, I found inner peace and was able to harness the flow of the universe.
So that's it? I just need inner peace? My innards are already super peaceful, so all I need to do is just get this thing going. Inner peace? You're going down. Now show me what you were doing there with your feet. I saw you do sort of a fancy foot
Ho!
thing.
Bandits, approaching the musicians' village.
Danger. Tell those musicians to start playing some action music because it is on. Don't worry, Shifu. I'll master inner peace as soon as I get back.
No snack stops this time.
Snack stops.
Sometimes in order to communicate effectively or to handle relationship problems adequately, we need to begin working on our own psychological flexibility. When our own psychological rigidity, when we get stuck in our own minds, when that gets in the way of effectively communicating and solving relationship problems, we need to learn how to get flexible in our own minds. Remember those 4 steps to communicating? Sometimes the reason why we struggle so much to follow those steps is our own difficult internal dynamics. Steve Hayes describes what he calls 6 pivots, 6 pivot points that we can make to get ourselves back on track. The first is diffusion. What he found is that when people see their thoughts with enough distance, they can choose what they do next, regardless of their mind's chatter. We all have our minds telling us things. Sometimes subconsciously, we don't even know what's going on in our own mind. But if we can learn to distance ourselves and see those thoughts for what they are, we can get greater control of them. 2, the self. Notice the story that you've constructed of your own self and gain perspective about who you really are. Oftentimes when something stressful happens to us, it means something to us personally because of the way we've built our own sense of self. And so learning to gain perspective about that and choosing what kind of sense of self you adhere to can go a long way in resolving how that impacts you and how you express things the way that you do in your relationship. 3rd is acceptance. The truth is, we don't like stress. We try to get away from it, right? And unfortunately, a lot of the solutions that people find for dealing with stress are not healthy at all. We live in a culture of turning to drugs and turning to other substances. Oftentimes we make inappropriate choices, purchase things that are not necessary for us just to feel better. So learning to accept and allow ourselves to feel feelings of pain and even a sense of vulnerability, and learning to be there and tolerate that can be an incredibly powerful tool that will allow us to better share what's going on with us, with our partners. The 4th is presence, being aware of what's happening inside of us and outside of us, directing our attention in an intentional way rather than just letting our mind do what it normally does by mere habit, focusing on the past or focusing on the future too much, but focusing more on the here and now. What's going on? What am I feeling? What am I thinking? The 5th is values, choosing the qualities of being and doing that we want to evolve towards. When we're stressed, we don't act our best. You all know that. But if we get clear about what our best really is, what we really aspire to be, then we can be more intentional about not letting our stress get ahead of us and choosing to deal with our stress in a self-dignifying way. Finally, the 6th is action. Although it's important to know what we want to be, we need to create those habits that will support those choices, support those ways of being with our partner, those ways of being with others when we are dealing with stress, which is inevitable. So, as a quick summary, our close relationships are our most important source of support. Everyday stress erodes relationships slowly and for a long time unconsciously if we don't get ahead of it. Stress of one partner always affects both partners. Shared stress means also shared coping. Because we share stress, we also need to learn how to cope together. Shared coping requires being aware of stress, talking about one's stress, listening, and providing support that matches the other's needs. Stress affects conflict communication. Partners argue more negatively when they're stressed. Relationships can reduce stress when they are healthy. And increasing psychological flexibility is also necessary for resolving personal and relationship stress. I just want to thank you for listening, and I hope that some of what I've provided today might be helpful for you. And I challenge you to think of one thing that stood out to you in this lecture that you could apply to your own life today. Thank you.